Okay, I have quorum. We'll go ahead and get started. It is 9 a.m. I'll call this working group meeting to adjourn. You should have the meeting packet out. So I have co-chair Hurd and I have member Representative Chun. Okay, so first order of business will be the approval of minutes. We'll run this like a board meeting. So can I get a motion on agenda item 2A for the approval of minutes? I see Rep. Chun's lips moving. Oh, got it.
Yeah.
Okay. Chair Hurd, are you on?
I am. I'm having a few technical
problem.
difficulties. I'm about ready to turn my camera on.
Wait, can I get a second on the
There I
minutes,
am.
please? Sorry, co-chair Hurd, can I get a second from you on the minutes, please? This is to review and discuss.
Okay.
Okay.
I think there might have been some delay today, but
Thank you. So, sorry, co-chair Hurd, could I get a second from you on the minutes?
oh
Rep.
yeah,
Chun
I
made the
second
motion.
that.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if you folks, if you're able to review and review the minutes, are there any changes or revisions that you noticed? Sorry, while we're doing that, I forgot to mention this meeting will be recorded. So we're recording both the video as well as the discussion. Okay. So going back, if there are no changes, can I get a motion to approve the minutes, please?
So moved.
Okay, thank you.
Second.
Great, thank you, thank you. Okay, and then a vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Okay, so moving on to agenda item 3. So before we go into the presentations by both Amanda Shaw and followed by Hunter Hedlund, in putting together kind of framework and looking, okay, where are we going to go moving forward on the interagency food systems? As in the last meeting, we talked about how this also compiled off of SR 111. And there are a lot of reports and studies that have been done in the past from where the state needs to go to diversification. What do we do with some of the rural communities? So one thought as we start to move forward in compiling the information to prepare the report, my thought is I definitely want to see the report as a document that really tells us, it'll summarize the what and the why, but we need to start looking at, well, how are we going to do this? What are the key inputs to really start syncing our food systems, whether it's the what's got to be done at the state level, what's got to be done at the county levels, what are those inputs from land to irrigation to facilities, because that will be the call to action, and then what an entity like the state can do to request those resources through bills or budgets. So that's just some input, and that kind of helped guide to reaching out to have these guests present today, some of the work that they've done in the past. And I'd also ask, as we listen to the presenters today, based on this timeline to get the report prepared, finalized, and submitted, probably looking at least 2 more meetings at sometime in December. And at our next meeting, if there are any other guests or presenters we should invite to speak, I'd like to have that submitted through the dbed.adc guest email, or dbed.adc@hawaii.gov email. And then we can, the co-chairs and the members can look that over and add that to our next agenda. So with that, there are any other questions by co-chair Hurd or member Chun?
None.
Oh, great. Okay. Thank you. So I'd like to move on to now 3A and have Amanda Shaw present. And then we can have, then we'll have questions follow. We'll have questions after her presentation, then we'll move on to Hunter.
Am I able to share screen?
Yes.
Okay, is that showing up for folks? Can you folks see anything on the screen?
Yes.
Okay, great. I can't actually see it myself there, but hopefully it should go over okay. Thanks so much. Thanks everyone for gathering. We wanted to share a little bit today about some just kind of background research we did to look at other states and how they have, used similar processes and what we could learn, but also how our context is unique. So I'm Amanda Shaw, statewide food systems coordinator with Agriculture Stewardship Hawaii. We have a public-private partnership to do this work. So Act 239, as folks recall, I think folks probably are pretty well aware, but just brief, background in case folks are new to the call, about the leadership of this group, about its purpose, about kind of what it's tasked with. And we'll sort of take the act as the framework for the presentation to sort of go one by one through the 6 dimensions of it. So there it is, six dimensions. It's really about developing governance, decision-making, operating protocols, coordinating with county and community-led organizations, identifying resources, so in funding, looking at how the group can communicate, and then looking really at this big piece, which I think, Dane, you were speaking toward, which is the report and implementation plans and really ways to measure progress. The last is also just looking at ways to analyze potential impact of policies before and after implementation. So when we look at other states, a few rise to the top. Now there's at this point quite a few states and then many cities and other jurisdictions, only a few regions that are really doing this kind of coordination work or planning work. And one that sort of stands out, I think, is the Vermont Farm to Plate Initiative. They're really one of the only states that have really tried to measure this in economic terms and done a good job of tracking that. So they are able to talk about the changes in economic output, the changes in number of jobs in food systems businesses as a result of having a coordinated action framework and ways of tracking progress. And then New Mexico as well has got really interesting examples. I know many folks have been engaged with their programming, but they also have a unique structure and have had a lot of support at the gubernatorial level there as well to do that work. And you can just see a list of some. The Transforming Hawaii Food Systems Initiative has a plan bank on their website. So they're in this presentation is embedded a link to that. So you can take a look at many of the other contexts that have either statewide or I believe they may also, I think that one is only statewide food systems plans. So if we look at the first part of the act, we're curious to see kind of, how already does being a working group, what kind of constraints and possibilities does that entail? So, first there's kind of the membership and how that will play out and who will be part of the working group itself. That is kind of the first piece. And then the second is really about how being a working group as a public board, considered as a public board under the Hawaii Sunshine Law. I know we talked a bit about that already, just how that governs boards, board meetings and some of those process. But as folks may already know, being subject to sunshine provisions doesn't tell you exactly what kind of voting or decision-making process you would have on different types of decisions. So many are simple majority, but you can see a number of others listed there. So there's some interesting examples to draw from, and also other states that have, developed decision-making protocols have used a range of these. There's not a ton of consensus on how that, each context is quite different, and each type of decision, that folks are taking may have a different type of protocol. One of the biggest things that I think we came across looking through this and thinking about the sunshine is, the difference between, because a lot of these statewide food systems plans and coordination and action frameworks, they really break down into thematic groups so that folks can go into depth on particular issues, workforce housing, irrigation, upgrades, whatever it may be, or they may pick slightly larger topics, food insecurity, equity and justice, other topics. But, in looking at how, we'll share a slide, the next slide will show sort of like just a very, brief example of what some thematic groupings can look like, having reviewed a number of other states and how they set that up. But it's also just the architecture of that. How does the group, want to think about that? There's the potential to do standing committees, but as we know, like the administrative burdens of that can be, somewhat burdensome as you need to develop a separate agenda. So there's kind of just different trade-offs at work there. And then the permitted interaction groups. There's also a kind of a difference in terms of who can be on either a standing committee or a permitted interaction group. So that's another, idea and an issue to kind of take into account. Permitted interaction groups, as I've understand it, and when I've talked to OIP, can include non-board members. So that means that if you were to develop a food insecurity working group, but you wanted to invite somebody that wasn't on the Act 239 working group board, AKA the folks that are here with us today, you could do that and they could help you. Like you could invite the food bank to your food insecurity thematic working group and you could, have their input for that report to then go to the board. But it appears, at least from my understanding, and please, if there are other sunshine experts or there are sunshine experts amongst us, please correct me. But from talking to them and from the research, it appears that standing committees, cannot have non-board members. One thing that also we found interesting in looking through about other, how other groups have approached this is that some have done kind of a formation committee or group. So they sort of use that for a very defined period of time in order to present ideas and kind of workshop different dimensions of governance. And so usually that they tried to keep that to, a smaller period of time. Some folks kept that formation committee ongoing so that they could periodically revisit how is the group working, what do we need to shift, those kind of things. Looking out at, there's a number of ways to sort of slice this pie. We know that, figuring out how to, in a system, can kind of break things out into thematic groups and have, kind of some sort of sense of, boundaries around, what you're talking about can be tricky. And there's lots of different ways to do it. And I think, we saw that in SCR, the Senate Resolution 111 working group last year that, it's really challenging. There's a lot of important topics within food and agriculture that intersect. So just, that's just a question for this working group to consider is how they would like to, see those different groups take shape. And there's a review in the longer report, which was part of the package that kind of shows some broad themes. And you can also look, I think at the end, I think there's an appendix that also shows by state kind of which groups they're using to look at their issues. When we were looking through this second provision about coordinating with county and community-led organizations, we know there's been a lot of amazing work, either current, as in the case of Hawaii County, or recent past, as in the case of Maui County, and ongoing with Honolulu County. We know there's some exciting, plans and implementation and action happening at those levels. So we're really interested to see what would be ways in which the process is happening in this group could integrate with that. And so some considerations are just like wanting to map and understand which agencies and entities, and thankfully, in the case of community organizations that transform Hawaii food systems, and I believe Hunter as well, have lists of community-based organizations that are active. So those are pretty extensive. So one wouldn't need to reinvent the wheel. In terms of county entities, there's obviously a number that are really relevant, and there's in particular existing food access coordinators under the Department of Health or like coordinated by the Department of Health, as well as I believe DAB has agricultural liaisons. In some cases, I think those may be some of the same people, although, or at least part of the same offices, but they don't totally overlap. But obviously there's a number of other departments that would be relevant in terms of, what they're doing on the food system. So just thinking about, sort of a menu of options for how folks could participate in the group, that seemed to be useful. We've seen a lot of statewide initiatives kind of have that. It's like, these are the different levels or ways you could participate. And so those are kind of listed there. And just one idea I think that links in with the county and community-led organization coordination is Some states have done regional committees so that they are bringing in different perspectives from across their state, or in some case, I think also region. Um, but just thinking about how could this hook into the existing food access and agricultural liaison infrastructure? Could those folks come and provide updates? Could there be some way to sort of tap into what's already happening there? And I think the others are relatively broad, just different ways you could attend a working group and submit, subject matter info as Deputy has suggested, forthcoming in the next few weeks. There's also the potential for different folks to comment and review draft policies or reports. And there's just, encouragement to participate. So this is identifying resources, and I think that really relates to what was in Act, or what was in the resolution from last year that really asked not just for a plan, but to show where the resources and the money for doing those plans and actions would be. And so this is another area that's in Act 239. So listed there some possibilities and many more. But of course, there could be funding for the ideas and the actions that the plan and framework identifies that happen through state and county budget processes. Listed a couple of interesting, maybe intersections there. There's work happening around the green free. There is a tie into certain dimensions of the food system. There was the previous barrel tax that was centered around food insecurity, for example. That's been kind of coming up in conversation recently. There's obviously ways in which that agencies might decide to commit to cost sharing that isn't necessarily about, money resources per se, but could be about technical assistance or data or other ways. And there's also, of course, federal grants. And yes, there are still federal grants, and they are still super important. And so that the working group could engage in trying to identify resources there to support its work. And then the same around philanthropic partners locally and nationally. So a couple are listed there, including networks of national food systems funders. Internal and external communication processes, fairly straightforward, but just the group will kind of need to understand what's going to work well for its members in terms of, sharing documents. Perhaps that's already available. Perhaps there are new channels that need to be developed. And I think, around this, it seems really important that the communication is kind of towards the actions, towards the tracking, towards implementation, and then what is kind of needed for that. In terms of communicating with the public, there's a number of options listed there as well. Just what would be some of the ways that the public could learn about this work, and also highlighting the success, eventual success and ongoing success, really, of the work that's been done to date, and will continue. 5 really feels like the main meat, and then everything else is kind of a supporting act. I guess I'm thinking about Thanksgiving already this week. It's really the turkey here. But creating time-bound implementation plans and ways to measure progress. I know there's a lot of great work that happens already that departments are asked to report back on the mandates that they have. And so there is information available. Would it be helpful to pull some of that into, existing dashboards or new dashboards so that folks can see where things are? And really just, I think, the process of organizing the report and the plan and updating it, that's definitely underway as we speak to kind of understand what's the best methodology there. And then policy impact tools to look at proposed actions. We know that it's quite hard. There's not always time to do this, but where there can be support brought in, folks that are already doing this kind of work that really want to help, that are located in academia or other places that really are interested to help model some of the potential impacts. That's something that could be looked at. And I think, what comes up for me is the Vermont, farm to plate, is that they're able to show that impact. And so being able to look ahead and say, how will really investing in this particular policy approach really yield that economic and social and community benefit? So there's some potential tools and frameworks that can do that amongst many others that are available. So kind of just, concluding on my side, and I guess some questions that I have ongoing and sort of takeaways from taking a look at some of these state plans and and kind of having been involved in the previous working group, there's different models. Each state and jurisdiction has its own model, and that entails its own trade-offs and constraints. And so just being really cognizant of that. And, this is our context. We have our particular, we have those here as well. One of the things that really struck me that some of the groups that are doing things like formation committees and others, they're trying to create a learning runway, and they're really using kind of more startup thinking, which is that there may be things that need to change and iterate on. It's not going to be perfect, as I think we were saying in the last call. It's not going to be perfect in the first instance, but as long as we're creating some runway where that learning is getting incorporated and things are adapting, that seems like that's been helpful in other places. And I think just the third, tracking impact, and that impact builds trust. We know that folks often roll their eyes at another working group, or maybe the concept of like food systems planning or coordination seems really abstract. So it seems like the more that this group can really demonstrate that impact, that can build trust and interest. And then fourth, we've seen a lot of this work happens through coalitions and multi-stakeholder processes. And so coalitional thinking, just accepting that folks won't agree all the time, but what are the key areas where folks really feel like we can come together and try to push forward on the work that everyone's doing. This is the one I always think about too, remembering that we're in it for the long haul. And so just, we know there's a lot of pressures to act quickly, and there is real, we know that folks that are in the system face real pressures and really want to see action, and that's super important. And it's also important to maintain the vision that this doesn't necessarily happen overnight, and that a number of folks are really committed in the long haul. And then six, I think just, kind of what this group represents is that individually we each know a little, but together we really know a lot. And so just leaning into that collective expertise that gets developed in these situations. So thanks for letting me share, and I'm available for any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Amanda. I'll just turn over to the attendees or guests. If you have any questions or comments, if you could raise your hand and then we'll call on you. Give a minute there for people to collect their thoughts. Chair Hurd?
Yeah, before we get more from the crowd, the challenge has always been, Amanda and everyone on the call, we all know the counties are very, very important. They're in charge of their food systems. Co-chair, how do we get the counties to share? Every county has a food system summit. How can we get them to how can we take their food system summit findings and then bring it into this interagency working group for the food system? And I'm trying to link the two together, but they're kind of like separate entities. That would be my comment.
Anyone have, Amanda, you have anything to add or have some thoughts? It actually ties into one of Amanda's slides. I think it was page 2 or page 6 of her slide deck.
Yeah.
So one thing would be to understand, I know like the city and county of Honolulu, I believe they have an ag liaison. I apologize, I don't know who, I know who the former person was.
Dean, I think that was one of the campaign things is we wanted the city and county of Honolulu to have an ag liaison. Remember Po Yung Lai? I don't think they have a Po Yung Lai now.
So
maybe Corey, do you know if they have a liaison at the city level? Representative?
I'm curious. I want to try to find.
My understanding is that role was not filled when Po Young left, but it's been a little bit sort of distributed across Jason Sean's position, and so kind of split between OER, OCCSR with the new food roles. There are other counties that still have titled agricultural liaison positions, however. Glen Sacco, for example.
Yeah, like Glen. There is no Glen at the city and county of Honolulu level that I know of.
So who's the so it'd be good to know then if there's a similar position on the neighboring counties as well, or equivalent, who those point people are. That could help with the coordination. Then we have the summit, who the point, if it's not the same person, who's the point for those summits, and what's the outcomes, whether it's information and or deliverables from those summits, and then align it to what the state is getting. There will be overlap, and then we can reconcile what those challenges or needs are. Because even at the county levels, they play a critical role with the communities and the nonprofits. And so how understanding what their challenges are, we do see them always asking for resources and understanding furthermore, if they get those resources, what are they going to? Is it to assist with workforce? The state is doing a pilot with Hele Imua on the agricultural side. That's going to help with covering costs for workforce, with interns. So a lot of it would come down to different resources, but that ties also into the infrastructure, irrigation, the facilities,
Biosecurity.
security. So, yeah, a few things I was jotting down was distribution, storage, operations, biosecurity. And when I go back to the general purpose of the act, it's very broad, but it covers within that, so I think some really good pillars. How do we move towards sustainable economic development? And how is that defined? It's not only the production of products here, whether it's the commodities or livestock, but also for export to help generate revenue so that we can
Right.
reinvest into this ecosystem.
Co-chair,
Look,
the words that
yeah.
you just said, economic development, are
Mhm.
key to the county level. Most of the liaisons that I work with on the county level are in the Office of Economic Development. Glenn Sacco, for instance, Hawaii County, Nalani Brun, Director of Economic Development, Benson Medina over in Maui, but there is no such person that I can identify at the city and county. So what you said, economic development, is where most of the other counties house their ag person. Hunter, Amy, Amanda, what you guys think? Do you hear?
Historically, that's where
Yeah.
they've been housed. Yeah. But the trend of late has been increasing food hires in positions that are
That's
just
true.
beyond the agricultural liaison role explicitly. That, Sarah Freeman, for example, at Hawaii County R&D. Glenn is still there in their case, but that's not the case for every county. I don't believe Maui has.
It is not the case for every county, so maybe that can be a takeaway, co-chair, that we would recommend from this interagency working group that we support county level food systems so that we can liaise with them. Maybe.
Do any of the counties or maybe non-government entities have a, a vision or structure or plan on at the county level, what their food systems will entail? That we could have them maybe invite to the next meeting?
Most of them are in process,
Okay,
and varying degrees. Honolulu, Hawaii County come to mind in particular. But pretty much every county, or at least an entity within each county, has some type of food system or food security focused plan that has been completed.
okay. Could you, if anyone has those links, if they could submit that through the dbed.adc, we could, dbed and ADC will go through it and we'll start to pull maybe some of the common methods or mentions into the first part of the report. So when Amanda was presenting to, I know we're on a crunch to prepare the initial report for this upcoming session, but the act does not dissolve the working group. If we're going to need resources moving forward, that will be a challenge and how we time that, and we ask for that. But looking at the structure though that Amanda proposed in her presentation, the report could serve not only as implementation but further guidance to flush out. So if we have these drop-off points or it's not as coordinated at the state and local levels, that should be suggestions. Because I think there really needs, and it's not just to have more meetings to have meetings, but there really needs to be someone driving at the tip and then coordinating. And if it's a sub-working group and then identifying those, I think that would be a great recommendation because then we know where we can leverage resources. The counties do get a lot of grants. They put a lot of grants out there. We have to be, I think, intentional. Are we really reconciling? Okay, are those grant funds going towards where we need to go in these food security systems? Or what is a long-term ROI? Amanda?
Yeah, thanks. I just wanted to say that thanks to Anna Ezzi from County of Hawaii through the last for the resolution 111 working group there is we did complete a table. So we did look through all the existing statewide and county plans to date. So Hawaii County is currently the most live in terms of having a new process they're updating. So we didn't have that information at the time, but we had their previous plan. And so there is a table with all the county recommendations broken out by theme. So I think we have some stuff to work on. We can contribute.
Any other comments? Seeing none. Oh, Alice.
Thank you so much. I just want to bring up the Transforming Hawaii Food System initiative. The website actually has a wealth of knowledge. There's actually a food system plan webpage. I'm not able to drop it in this chat, but that one single site actually consolidate all county level food plans if it's in process or it has already completed. So there is a page we can definitely share.
Alice, could you send the link to co-chair Wicker and myself?
Will do. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ingrid and/or Kelly, if you could drop the email address into the chat so people can reference that for any materials or additions or suggestions they want to submit, they can do it through the email.
Dane chat is turned off.
Oh, no. Oh, okay. We'll figure that out. Okay. I'd like to move on to the next item, which would be Hunter. If you can, if we can allow him to share his screen.
Okay. Teams, let's see. My apologies, I have 700 windows open apparently. And it's struggling to figure out which one we are on. And that looks like not quite the right one. Are you seeing the slide?
No, we're seeing and a window that says click to exit full screen.
Okay, let's try this again. What's happening there? All right, well, we'll just do it from the screen, I guess. My apologies here. Amanda, if I send you this link, would you be able to pop this up?
For sure.
Thank you.
Co-chair, while they're sending each other
Apologies.
the links, I wanted to say that I was not familiar with the Better Food Policy website that Amanda pointed out in her presentation. I went there and it seems to be a good funding source for any of the nonprofits out there that may not have known about it like me. It's a Better Food Policy Fund. That's it.
Yeah, and I know Eileen. So if anybody's interested in connecting with the person who started that.
Can you see a screen now?
Yes. And then, yeah.
Let's see if it follows to the correct screen. Are you still seeing slides? Are you seeing slides?
Yes. We got it.
Beautiful. All right. Nothing like starting a presentation about my technical wizardry by having a technical foible. So I'm Hunter Evelyn. I'm a food systems planner. My firm is called Super Assistance. Going to be sharing a little bit today about some of the efforts that I hope will inform some of this work going forward. This is building on some momentum of my years of sort of data digging and tinkering as a perpetual PhD student at the University of Hawaii at Manoa, where my research focuses on food system resilience in Hawaii over time, like taking a sort of a longue durée approach to exploring how we have maintained resilience when it really mattered as our integration into the global marketplace came online. And as changes at that global scale have brought different types of change within our local food system. So really how, we could say periods of capital accumulation through agriculture globally restructure how our food system functions and the types of vulnerabilities, crises, and resilience strategies that we employ as a result. So this is building a bit as well on some discussions I've had with Deputy, sharing some of these notions, and I'm going to offer some takes here in 3 acts discussing coordination infrastructures, a sort of resilience portfolio approach, and then get into briefly some implementation pathways. So I really view my work somewhat under the banner of value chain coordination. So this is work that was really lifted up by the Winrock Center and others that offered an approach to thinking across the value chain that I think is a particularly useful mechanism for those who are thinking about the food and agriculture as systems and exploring multiple opportunities to intervene to try and facilitate food system change. So this may differ, we could say, from like a single product focus, which may be about improving the performance of a given commodity, but instead tries to coordinate across producers, hubs, maybe even multiple different networks, and really often has a bent towards the support of family farming, diversified agricultural production, as well as having an eye to sort of system level resilience. I think that echoes a fair bit of kind of what's been discussed around some of the commodity coordination work. So just offering some of my frame. With that lens in mind, I've been developing a suite of, say, kind of market intelligence tools. These are really that scale from international trade all the way down to local retail food price. And so I'm going to share a few of these. There are some other integration opportunities that I'll just sort of leave hanging. Part of this came out of work Anna Ezzy at Hawaii County R&D and I did, looking into opportunities to support our local data system understandings by linking up with some federal resources. So for example, farm to school data is supported by the USDA in a few different states already. And I know it's something that our Department of Education has year over year. I think the either timeliness or depth of some of the mandatory reporting for Acts 175 and 176 lend to the notion that maybe some additional external support would be could be valuable. That being said, there's a whole suite of different analyses that I've begun pulling together. This one is not yet live on the internet, but this is essentially some screenshots of an international trade dashboard. So this brings monthly import and export trends and allows a whole slew of different visualizations. So here's just a couple of examples of imports, exports, and totals, and it allows you to dig down in through the harmonized system or HS code hierarchies to really understand what trade movements are moving out of Honolulu's port. It does not allow us to determine specifically whether this is of Hawaii origin or specifically destined for Hawaii, but at least gives us the contours of trade that can inform some market understandings. So for example, digging into, and this is again just another visualization approach, we were importing, I forget what year this particular image was for, but say $1.6 million of cassava, something that's easily growable here. And it affords opportunities to dig in really in a detailed manner to a lot of different trade details. By taking that type of information and displaying it year over year, as opposed to just reviewing, a single year's or recent months trade information, we can start to see seasonality trends, as well as start to explore the dependencies that we might face from given regions in some cases, or even getting more detailed into the countries that we may face import dependency risks from that could conceivably be extrapolated into analyses of what and at least in the sort of global food security narrative, are sometimes termed as multiple breadbasket failure, right? What are the climate effects? What are the war effects? And how might that actually begin to inform our understanding of risk, systemic risk within our food system? The next data set that is actually up on the internet now, and this presentation will be shared so folks can ferret these out later, is exploring some of the inter-island commerce. And this is a slightly different data, some overlap, but this allows us to explore what the movements are through interactive maps of tonnage with some heat maps, and there's some Sankey diagrams to start exploring, what types of goods are moving from which ports between the islands to help us get a sense of what trade might be like within the state. Again, it doesn't allow maybe the desired degree of certainty to know that the goods that are moving are indeed ones that are of Hawaii origin, but at least gives us a sense of the volumes of trade that could help inform some of our planning decisions. As we scale down further, we can also start looking at some of the retail price, right? So we've gone from global trade to inter-island trade to now looking at what's happening in the retail market. And the USDA has been gracious enough to hopefully continue to provide a national weekly retail price information data set that is, again, and all of these data sets have caveats, that this one is based off of advertised sale prices, right? So it's not necessarily perfectly representative of what is the full marketplace, but it is at least representative, especially when we start being able to look over time at what the common prices are for a variety of goods. And this, again, also is a website that's live up on the internet. You can go there, click through, and see for Hawaii or for different regions, they aggregate data regionally for the continental United States. And start to see what are the price changes, right? And so this type of information could be utilized to, say, inform, we could say the market basket approach. If you are a price focused consumer or, say, a government entity trying to ensure that food security is possible and wanted to make recommendations about what types of goods you consumer might want to pursue, this could inform that. Also, certainly of value for production planning for farmers to get some sense of the volumes and availabilities in the marketplace, because that is not data that our state has readily provided in some time. Scaling back out a bit, when we think then about how we could improve that production planning, a key gap that we face is in addressing our land use. And I think optimization may not be the perfect word. It's all about trade-offs, I think, more than optimizing. But what I wanted to highlight here, and what this unfortunately rapidly moving GIF shows, is some of the land use change in one particular area in Mililani over the past 50, 70 years or so. And it is part of a study I did for the State Office of Planning, commissioned by the legislature, really digging into our different land classification systems to better understand how or if they are serving our regulatory purposes. And what the image shows on the right-hand side, rather, excuse me, on the left-hand side, is what is currently rated through our Land Study Bureau as A lands, and on the right-hand side is currently rated as D lands. When the second snapshot of Honolulu report was done in the early 1970s, the land on the right was in sugar, and so it was given a D rating. This is the exact same soil type. This is using soils data that was collected itself in the 1930s and released in the 1950s. So unfortunately, our regulatory approach is currently taking 1930s data and 1960s markets to determine where we should be building for things like, say, a solar farm in the 2030s. So there's a drastic need for updating that. And you can read all about it at the project website or in the reports that have been given to the legislature, but there's a whole slew of recommendations there that seek to update, we could say, the land use planning protocols. And some of the ideas that could be explored in that are having a classification system, if it was designed for agricultural determinations, that is actually focused on crop suitability. So we can run current crop suitability, future crop suitability using climate data and overlap those areas and then start to identify, for example, if you are the Agribusiness Development Corporation interested in determining what lands you might want to purchase, and an approach could be we want to identify the lands that are useful for the largest volume of crops with the lowest amount of inputs over the longest period of time and focus acquisition emphases there. California, fortunately, from a more regulatory perspective, has already created a model that allows for the National Agricultural, the USGS's Soil Survey Geographic Database to be automatically informing their land classification systems, and that's something that we could easily implement as well. So when we get to thinking about the potential collaborations, fortunately, Tibet ADC are already on the case, right? So they've been in, I believe, already some discussions with CTAR and one of the professors there who I worked with on some of this mapping efforts, also exploring, what this could look like going forward. Once we have a better handle on our lands, getting a clearer sense of our waters is a key gap in this system. All right, so there's no, at least that I've ever stumbled across in my embarrassingly long years and late nights fiddling around with all manner of data sets I can get my hands on. There is not a well up-to-date, comprehensive statewide map of irrigation coverages. And this is a significant limitation. There has been some efforts. This was actually a mapping effort I undertook as a subcontractor on behalf of ADC. So somehow many of these efforts often land in my lap. But what we can identify is that these core pieces influence our ability to plan effectively for agriculture and to maybe even understand where we might want to position our infrastructure investment resources. But it's not just about the lands and the waters, it's about what happens with the goods that are actually produced. And so in looking historically, there are some coordination mechanisms that have brought together a variety of stakeholders from brokers, producers, dealers, buyers, etc. This is my oft pointed back to produce information exchange effort that actually grew out of a CTAR conference in the early 1950s and functioned for about 2 decades, bringing together really an anchor purchaser model. In this case, it was the federal government responding to the Defense Production Act that was informed by issues in accessing sufficient goods during World War II, but it was a data-driven coordination approach. And when we think about what this could look like today, there are opportunities, and I would say, and I'm about to share, some mechanisms that we could build upon that are already in existence and that could be facilitated into, I think, a broader produce information exchange model that could look like this, right? So conceivably bringing together the supply databases. I've been working with all the food hubs across the islands for many years, have done actually data assessments with pretty much all of them to understand their supply data systems, to see how we could start to aggregate that supply information to send market signals to inform institutional purchasers. On the demand side, similar efforts have been underway with counties. I've been working with Honolulu and Hawaii counties, particularly with the visitor industry. And now the state is really stepping up in the form of efforts like this and the commodity coordinator role to increase the potential purchasing by institutions. On the other side of it is the need, and in working with food banks and key feeding organizations over the years, there's opportunities that have arisen there as well. And some of that has taken the form of actually digging into the individual purchasing data that can then help inform an individual institution's capacity to understand where they can gain ground. So this was data from Lanakila Pacific some years back. I'm embarrassed to say I've forgotten the exact numbers and the swirl of data that's ever rolling around in my head, but Rona Fukumoto and her team, after this findings in late 2020, that there was a relatively small portion of local food produce that was integrated and local food products integrated in. They're now spending significantly more and have a drastically increased proportion of their local food purchase that has come as a result of analyses and really their dedication to this cause. So it's an example of what the the value proposition can be for an individual institution, say one of these at the far left or far right, to better understand their purchasing. And then by working together to have coordinated dashboard and sharing tools, we can then begin to imagine what linking these systems up could afford us. So this is a bit of a mock-up I've been building as part of some of the expansion of implementation work with Honolulu County, for example, looking into both some of the institutional stakeholder spread across the island and making some recommendations about how that good food purchasing program might move forward, as well as work with Hawaii County, which has already been building relationships between food hubs and resorts. And we can then begin to imagine what we could learn about our system and what we might be able to glean to improve our, oh, where we go. It looks like some of these animations aren't working, so we will skip that. There's a whole slew of other little pieces that you would have been able to see there. But anyhow, this starts to give us the opportunity to really dig down into, and this is from a pilot study I did with Food Hubs in 2019, what are the price data that aren't just the retail sale price coming from the USDA, but what do we know about market prices, particularly for the diversity of smallholder operations, which is to say the majority of operations in the islands, to inform their market planning. And by compiling some of this price information, we can then start to imagine directing market planning and farm planning, even at a regional level, towards goods that we know have high demand and maybe good market prices, and could be further informed by what we understand about the actual willingness to pay on the part of, say, institutional partners. So where does this build from here? As I mentioned at the outset, my research has really taken a long-term look. So when I think about resilience and understanding resilience in our system, part of my academic work has been compiling what the sort of epochs are of forms of disruption and mechanisms of resilience over time in the past, say, 250 years or so. And what really I've found in this is that our sources of vulnerability have gone from being regional, right, the sort of weather, warfare, to increasingly economic and systemic. Our integrations into the global marketplace have exposed us to the vagaries through the benefits of teleconnection, import opportunities to diversify our diets and so forth. We are now deeply interconnected into the global system, and when disruptions can happen anywhere along it, they can propagate into our shores. And as a result of that integration, we have what I would maybe sometimes term the permanent crisis that has informed work like this and others of import dependency. Right? It has been a rationale. It's been something we've been hand-wringing about since at least the 1880s, saying we import too much food, but yet the trend continues. And as a result of digging in historically, part of what I've found is that when there is a disruption, in this case, for just as one example in World War II, when there's a disruption, we are able to reorient some of the goods that we formerly exported to feed ourselves. We don't want to focus solely on production for local consumption, because if there is a disruption in our supply chains that are imported, all of that local production is already spoken for. So as a key resilience mechanism, exports are critical. And what we found in World War I, in this case, there was a significant export of bananas that was disrupted, and we were able to reorient that to support the food system here. There was the creation of what was, I believe, tongue-in-cheek termed the Banana Consuming Propaganda Committee, as well as the development of banana bread, which was a war bread and one of many that were tested, but clearly has entered the local palate, as I wish I was eating some now because I'm talking way too much. So what this starts to tell us, right, is that this export mechanism is critical. But what we saw, and when we think about the way that these global risks manifest as local system risk, we want to understand not just the export relationship, but the distribution between suppliers within our local marketplace. right? If we have a homogeneous system versus heterogeneous ones, we can begin to get a sense of what the potential propagations of risk are within our actual local supply chains. Because as all of that data earlier demonstrated, getting as detailed about some of our global relationships can be, we'll say, tricky at the least. But what we seek to do is to reduce the systemic risks that we face. It's sort of a realpolitik approach to thinking about where is it that we can gain ground while still being part of the global system. So in practice here, I think this takes the form then of some import dependency analyses, right? A lot of what I just shared, thinking through what are the geographic concentrations of, county, regional, this could be globally in terms of country dependencies, that could be regional production, or even thinking about the concentration of certain types of producers or the potential risks that are come about when single producers begin to dominate one aspect of our local market. Because when we look historically, part of what has been demonstrated in the history of capitalism and agriculture is that scale dominates, and we sooner displace other local producers than we have a history of displacing imports. And this is of particular importance to how we think about the role of state subsidy in supporting agricultural development and food system resilience, which is critical to sustaining household food security. So some of these tools from network resilience mapping and otherwise, I think help us to identify what some of these key nodes are. So when we think then beyond just an efficiency lens, if you will, we really want to, I guess we could say, think about the opportunities to have data-driven planning, to align our infrastructure, and to really take sort of a portfolio approach. There's supposed to be a little portfolio image there, but and we need to also begin addressing some of the key data gaps. I think most on this call are probably aware, but I can tell you how many eggs moved between one island and another in May 1953, and I can't tell you how many we moved last year. So these are critical pieces of data that we are operating blindly without. So until we are able to restore, and hopefully this session, Sharon, we're ready for it. We'll get some additional support for agricultural statistical analyses, but that also is important for aligning some of our infrastructure investments, right? So ensuring that the processing facilities serve the markets that we have. But I think it's also critical that we ensure that that infrastructure investment supports multiple scales of operations, right? We need to have resilience in the diversity of scales that we have operating within our islands, and need to be cognizant of the power of certain, market actors to overwhelm the marketplace and push others out. And the concern there is then that we end up with all of our eggs in one basket, right? We need anchored operations functioning at scale that are efficient, that ideally can capture some of that export market, can benefit from the processing infrastructure. But if we forsake the portfolio approach and only emphasize those who are operating at scale, we will have a hollowed out middle scale of agriculture and a more brittle system in the long run. Because certainly looking at the history of agricultures at scale here, over time, when the sole mechanism, the sole rationale for your participation in Hawaii's agricultural markets is economic remuneration, those markets leave, right? We lost sugar, we lost pine. No shortage of commodities have had a boom and a bust. But what has sustained production here are smallholder and family farmer and diversified farming operations. And so we need to be cognizant that supporting both is a critical approach to state support. Part of the other thinking in that, right, is that we can consider what a dual circulation approach might be. And this is drawing from actually part of essentially China's investments and consideration for their economic development, where they think of it as having domestic circulation for some volume of goods and being part of international circulation for another volume of goods. This thinking I think echoes well, certainly in the domestic side for what's become, popular, certainly in some of the local circles of late in terms of the circular economy. But we don't want to just have a circular economy. We still want to benefit from those export markets, particularly because in my professional academic perspective, 100% import dependence is not resilient, nor is the pursuit of 100% local food self-sufficiency. Right. And part of the discussion in efforts like this that I think is critical is how we actually negotiate those ratios and where and in which systems we want to pursue diversification versus optimization. So from a framework, right, we need to have, yes, there are some efficiency metrics, but we also need to have resilience metrics. And part of what I'll be working with Amanda on in some coming weeks, and actually part of what will be a major discussion in 3 weeks, Alice knows better than I, whenever our food system summit is that there are opportunities then to link this into some of our emergency food planning work, right? Because we actually have systems of planning that are happening from the household to the county to the state scale, and we're beginning to bring together those various actors and ensuring that we have diversity of supply chain for some of these key nodes. For example, the food banks and efforts like Farm to Food Bank are critical mechanisms to increase the resilience in our system so that if our local supply is disrupted, those key social safety nets are actually able to sustain themselves. And if our imported supply is disrupted, that we have the relationships, cold chain infrastructure, and otherwise that is able to route resources into those social safety nets. So I'm tired of hearing myself talk, so I'm going to maybe skip a few slides on this one, but just as some quick implementation pathways, and as Amanda alluded to earlier, there's already been no shortage of social network analyses that I think can help inform some of the tasks of this effort. This is a visualization from a project I did with Albie Miles and others under the Transforming Hawaii Food Systems work, and this was a statewide social network analysis that enables users to explore some of the relationships at that time over the Hawaiian Islands. Other opportunities that are upcoming is exploring what some of the baseline metrics are that we might want to be tracking. Amanda and I are in discussion about what a dashboard and platform might look like to start actually compiling and culling information from the reports that are going to the legislature, Acts 175, 176, or 144, whatever it is now, and putting those into a platform. So part of what we'll hope to see going forward, and I'm going to skip some of these, is a platform and an opportunity to get some feedback from all of you on which of these are useful. Because in my mind, there is the long-term visions. We want a coordinated network architecture that brings together people and data to help inform the development of a resilient archipelago economy that I think is one that focuses not just on its own self-sufficiency, but it smartly pursues those external markets, one of which for us is the resort industry, right? Because while food in World War I left in the belly of a boat, the export that we have the easiest access to now is the visitor industry, where food leaves in the belly of a visitor. And when disruptions happen, the visitor industry grinds to a halt, but we then have all of that unclaimed foodstuffs in our local system that we're able to reorient to feed ourselves. And that thinking, I think, is critical to both this sort of dual circulation, but by supporting a diversity of scales of producer, certainly emphasizing some of those that are focused on regenerative systems, we can build the community resilience that I think is part of the reason we're all here. I am going to leave it on some of these key questions. And as I mentioned earlier, I really view it as being about trade-offs, right? So what resources do we want to prioritize? Please follow up with me or maybe the co-chairs if that's feasible as well, of like which of these, this menagerie of tools is most seemingly useful. Feedback on them is welcome. I do plan on getting the first one that I showed. The website went down sometime in the past couple of days, so I'll get that back up soon, and we'll update the report to have that in there. But we just offer that continuing to support this effort going forward, I'll be providing through support with Ag Stewardship Hawaii, some other technical assistance, some research support, as well as developing a platform for tracking some of those items. And should anybody have any questions, feel free to reach out. And mahalo for your time, and looking forward to feedback and continuing to work together.
Thank you, Hunter. I'm going to turn over to the group. We have about 50 minutes left. I'll turn over to the attendees, guests first, with any questions or comments, and then take it back to the board.
Well, Chair, I do have some comments.
Chair Hurd?
You can always count on me for comments, right? So, Hunter, you don't see it on the screen, but my mind is blown. You have just opened
good.
up.
It's had a
I
good
know,
blown.
I feel like I need an essay question right now because I have so much to say, right? I feel like I've just had a real important course and I need to like answer questions. But so I do have some notes and yeah, so many every one of your slides, for instance, your price points over time. Okay, that one, did you possibly, like, this is just one of the questions. I'll stop after this one. Did you make a difference between conventional and organic? Like kale at
So-
750, is that organic kale?
I think what you were talking about was just a point in time 1 month analysis in August of 2019 with Food Hub's data. The differentiation between organic and non-organic is available in the live food price tracker at foodprice.supersystems.org.
No, it's actually
and
when
that
you
actually
started back in
does
2013.
differentiate.
You started up way historical data. Papaya hasn't moved. And that's been my argument. Papaya farmers don't make enough money for the work they do. And yet the kale farmers went from here to 750. That's the graph, but we can take that over later.
Yeah,
I'm just saying that there's plenty follow-up from my side.
There certainly is, and the hope is that by translating that 1 month analysis into this data infrastructure, we can start to get a better sense of those patterns over time. One of my takeaways from that pilot study that was actually supported by Hawaii Green Growth, was up on the dashboard, maybe still is somewhere, was that what we saw is that as markets mature, price spread shrinks, right? So items like papaya had very few, all the dots were sort of in the same area.
Yeah.
And when you had novelties, kale was big. Kale had just come in, and everybody was into it, similar to like beans, right? Things that were just beginning to kind of be of interest in certain parts of the agricultural sector. Their price spreads were crazy, but as a market matures, it seems to settle. Was at least one takeaway.
James.
Jamie?
Hey, Hunter. How you doing?
Good.
Okay. I just had a question. So one piece that you mentioned was exports are critical. And that's like kind of the opposite, maybe that's not what we would all initially think of. And if you look at like specific industry beef cattle and how the model of beef cattle is really just exporting, say, 6-month-old cattle for finishing on the mainland, and we ship back, butchered beef. If we don't develop those systems here locally, how could we take advantage of local beef in terms of need when that comes to fruition?
Well, I would say it's not just that exports are not a monolith, right? So when I say exports are critical, I think I mean that in the form of exports are a critical mechanism if we think about which of them can actually build the resilience within our system as something that can be reoriented to feed us, right? If we are exporting, and I don't want to malign any industry, if we are exporting a food product that is not immediately consumable, we could say, that's harder to reorient rapidly, right? And to some degrees, major parts of our export economy of our agricultural export economy are already shaped by the big bottleneck that is the Pacific Ocean, right? So a number of the things that we export are at the early stages of the life cycle, right? So we've got shrimp fry, we've got seed corn, we've got those types of items that they're reorienting isn't really immediately redeployable to feed us. That doesn't mean we shouldn't support them, but when we're thinking from a resilience perspective, it's the exports that, particularly through the visitor economy, which I view as an export, because it's essentially money coming in. It's self-exporting. They fly themselves home. You don't have to pay for the shipping. So that kind of thinking, more so than just anything that we happen to produce en masse and are able to find a purchase in an external economy for.
Right. So I'll add to that. That's, for specifically DBED, exports is what grows the tax revenue base here. So we're not leaking out those dollars. We have to figure out how do we add more to our general fund, which in turn can either go directly to pay for programs that are going to support agriculture, whether it's operational or infrastructure, as well as expand that tax base. So when we look at exports, it could be the extras that we get from farmers. If we're looking at food security, farmers have to stay in business. And time again, they come to us with their problems of, I have all these off grades, what can I do? So fortunately, Hawaii has gotten ahead. You have the facility on Maui, you have the facility on Oahu, where people who are not necessarily the growers, they're more maybe a small enterprise that says, hey, I'll take your off grades, I'm going to go create a recipe. That creates a new market and more income for the farmer, and that's an exportable product. So let's say it's beef for ulu. Some people's model is, no, I only want to scale up for local consumption. That is awesome. If we have other small to medium size who say, I only want to focus on value add, they're going to help support the funding that's going to be needed to go back into this infrastructure and facilities. The other component too is how we can pull in that farm to school, right? So that's another way to do the off-grade. So I kind of go off on a tangent here, but export is a huge part of it. And it's not that everything's export. And Hunter's right. Export doesn't mean we necessarily ship it off. We count exports if the visitor comes here and buys it off of a local shelf and takes that back with them. But all of that is new money coming into state, because otherwise right now the model is just continuously leaking out, and you compound that with all the other dollars we leak out for other state demand. At some point in time, we're going to be so cash strapped, we're going to be in a very much world of hurt. So the exports has to be part of the overall model, but not necessarily every single commodity or every single protein is going to be on that export market.
It's like Chris had his hand up.
Hey, Chris.
Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. I really, as far as resiliency goes, Hunter, your model as far as repurposing, all the food that would, go to tourists when the tourists aren't here in that situation, that was pretty cool. And your data tools are just amazing. That really blew my mind as well.
Cool.
I had a thought, kind of using that same rationale. If we had a local feed industry here, kind of to Jamie's point, to support, those, so farmers wouldn't need to ship the cattle off for finishing. If we had that here, the scale of the amount of feed that takes, I think that would make a pretty significant dent as far as resiliency, in terms of grains and things like that. If we had the the drying and long-term storage infrastructure and the medium scale processing to handle things like that. And of course, when we lost the flour mill, back in, was that 2014, I think, that was a pretty big blow to resiliency right there. If anyone has any information on, like, if any of that equipment is still available or things like that, I know I'd be interested. For our farming model, we're growing corn and sunflower right now, and right now the corn is for chicken feed, and we would also be interested in like value-added products and things like that for that. But of course, we don't really have any of those processing capabilities here yet. We might have a few of the pieces, but anyway, I just so it kind of what we're getting at was I see that the scale of the feed industry that we could have here, being repurposed in in the event of an emergency, and actually being able to at scale, feed large amounts of people, and maybe just maybe in the event of a major scenario, like kind of like you were describing, we wouldn't have to say like ship off whole families and things like that, because we wouldn't be able to. So that's
I think part of what you highlight, I view, and my analysis is really informed, my academic analysis is really informed by thinking of risk as almost and thermodynamically, right? It's like risk is, it just moves. It's not that we're necessarily losing risk or gaining risk. It's just what the locus of it is within the system. And I think what you highlight is an important almost like thought process, right? Because if we just do the processing locally, we're just shifting our risk elsewhere in the supply chain. All right. And if we solely look at it from that lens, like, is that really actually increasing our resilience? Not necessarily. But if we also bring in the perspectives of economic diversification, and we're able to capture more value and reduce the costs on the part of the producer, which can help them get to scale, and there's all these manifold economic multiplier effects, then the sole question of, well, is it the most efficient thing to do, and is it actually quantifiably decreasing risk? Like, not necessarily. So I think it's really the discussion needs to be around what are the trade-offs and what are we trying to design towards. And I will say, with my Farmers Union advocacy director's hat on, we are exploring some cooperative purchasing approaches, not necessarily getting into the processing side of it yet, but though it could lead there. But if you're interested in that, I'd be happy to follow up, because it is something we're looking at pursuing.
Awesome.
Amanda.
Yeah, thanks. This is kind of maybe a question for Hunter and maybe Dane and Sharon as well. Just thinking about the studies in the 90s around import replacement and which crops in particular. So I'm not sure, Hunter, if that's some stuff that you've looked at again recently. Just curious if we're looking at our top, at our imports, like what feels like good candidates, where are folks headed these days? Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, I think Sharon and I maybe first met because I would call her up every month during the enumeration of our imports. However many months, years ago that was, rather. I think enumerating the imports is important, but just having that market signal alone is insufficient to ensure that, like, if you grow it, they will come, is not always the case, right? And particularly if it's uncoordinated. Hawaii has what's termed in academic and otherwise agricultural economic language as a pocket market, right? So if you're growing some cucumbers and I grow cucumbers, and suddenly we have twice as many cucumbers as we need, the price bottoms out and we all lose. Well, maybe not the consumer, but certainly the producer, right? And so I think it's not just the imports quantification that's important, but looking at the market fit on the part of demand, but then also really thinking strategically about, like, well, what would it take to actually displace? And so part of the benefit of doing these detailed data analyses, in particular, the Lanakila example came up, was in actually going through and having my other price information available, I was able to identify for them low or no and then low cost transitions for local products. And that, just because we import a lot of something doesn't mean we'll ever have the economies of scale of production to make it anywhere, competitive in the marketplace.
So, Hunter, that discussion tells everybody on this call why you and I have pinch points, because from what Amanda said, the reason that I wanted to quantify the data was for the simple reason of letting the farmers know what to grow. That's all that I use the data for. If we're bringing in cucumbers, hey, grow cucumbers. If we're bringing, and to your point though, it becomes their decision. Are cucumbers cheaper to bring in, or is it better if I buy the import, right? So that kind of, but it gives the farmers a choice. If we're bringing in, you know what I mean? Then that's simple. And then you take it from there, and there's the essay question. There's yeah. So
I think it's the
I'm
import,
glad
the import data and the price data, right?
right.
Those
They want
together
both.
really,
They want
really
both.
enable. Yeah.
They want both. And I'm glad that Representative Ag Chair Corey Chun is on the call, because we will be bringing in a bill to resurrect that statistics piece that you were mentioning. We miss it. We know how valuable it is. Hopefully this time it'll make it through all the way to conference. It died in conference last year. And I think he's kind of tired of hearing the industry and the department ask for that data. So
I wouldn't have
your
to do any of
information will
this if
be
that
great
existed.
testimony, Hunter. Your information is justification, and it's data-driven, science-based. What could be better than that? So that's the data. That's how we use the data. It's just simple. What am I going to grow? What are people buying? Period.
Market signals.
So based on now, then we'll call on Weston, and then Alice. If Weston, if you still want to speak, just put your hand back up. I did jot down data because, in government, we always say, oh, let's get data, but for what? Now that we're being driven by mandates, right? You have Act 151, doubling food production. Act 175 is DOE to purchase 30% by 2030. And Act 176 sets a mandate for other state institutions. So this thing is chicken and egg, because people's palates over time have not changed. But there could be a shift as DOE puts in their regional kitchens, preparing the meals with local product. Those palates will change over time. We're just accustomed. I mean, I laugh at it too, because when we go outside of the country to taste cuisine, we look forward to their local produce, their local cuisine. But with our visitor industry here, it's still that kind of American cuisine, right? They will look for that authentic Hawaiian cuisine, but we don't have the scale for that yet. So there's so many things out there where it's piecemeal. We have certain things in place, and now we can start. And as we start the discussion, look into what the counties are doing with their food plans and how we can adapt and lay over that. Over time, there's going to be a shift, but we have to start figuring out, okay, what's that low hanging fruit, and then what's the end game? And back to the data, DOE has provided DBED with what they import. And to Chair Hurd's point, it is our job to say, okay, if we're going to try to cover that 100% so that we can take that import off, does the state have enough lands to produce that? Does it still have to be conventional? Or can we go to an indoor facility, but who's going to pay for that? But if we do invest in an indoor facility that reduces the intense land use, we address biosecurity because now it's a controlled climate. And furthermore, we can actually expand what we grow here because of the climate control. But there's a whole other now domino of the energy costs. So this working group is much more bigger than agriculture, but it sets forward what the vision is for the state, and then how there's the other wraparound services. And I'll kind of go into that in closing, but I'm going to go to Wes, and then we'll go to Alice. Wes, you had your hand up earlier. Wes, if you're speaking, I think you're on mute. Well, we cannot hear you. We still aren't able to hear you. If you're on a headset, you might need to restart and then rejoin. Alice?
Thank you so much for allowing me just to share 2 comments and question. In Hawaii County, like Hunter just mentioned, we actually supported a local food purchasing initiative connecting hotels and food hubs. We had an event actually identified from the resorts what are the top 10 produce that they import the most. And for example, broccolini, it was on the list, even though it is something Hawaii farmers could totally easily grow them locally. But that is a very helpful information, like we shared to the food hubs so they can distribute to the producers. Like you can grow broccolini, we have buyers to secure those. But the problem with that initiative is without a funding continuing supporting the network gathering. I think right now Hawaii County continue facilitate that relationship, but for Oahu, I'm not sure if there's any hotel or resort association are doing that. But on the positive side, I think there are already this kind of network exists to identify opportunities. So that is my comment. And another comment is just for in terms of Hunter's comments on prioritizing resources and increase federal funding. I do have a question. How can we, like, as a state, improve our chances of winning federal grants? Because it's going to get more and more limited. And Amanda and I, we even like talked about a coconut wireless approach, because whenever there's a major grant comes out, a lot of nonprofits, even local government are competing the same grants. But how can we have a network that we can share those kind of resources and have the organizations to collaborate together as a coalition, just to maximize like our collective chances of winning, rather than competing with each other. Thank you.
Yeah, it was
DOA's
mentioned
got a great
earlier.
grant writer.
Oh, go on, Hunter.
I'm saying DOA's got a great grant writer.
We do,
Working
but I
hard.
wanted to say that, Alice, you bring up a very good point.
DAB.
The federal government, the USDA and all the federal agencies are working on collaboration grants. Remember the RFSI? Remember the Food Business Center? It was a regional grant. They don't want competing grants. They want all of us to work together to come up with the best plan that they can fund. That's why now, before the new administration, one of the stipulations for grant submission was 1 grant per region. Does anybody on this call remember that? Hunter, I know you do. It was 1 grant. So we had to all get together and say, is it going to be the UH? Is it going to be the Department of Ag? So people are working towards, the USDA knows that. Now, with this current administration, they pulled all that down. They said, we don't want that. We want to give money direct to producers. So they're revamping their grant programs. They're saying we don't want it to go to the UH or to the Department of Ag or to any nonprofits. We want it to go direct through one agency to the producers. So it's coming back, Alice, and we do still need to work together. The counties and the state and the feds, we all have to collaborate. We can't compete. So it's happening. It's just taking a while.
I'm going to go over some of the notes I jotted down when Hunter was presenting. So one of the key things there that he presented and also exposed gaps was the data. And I think one of the requests going into the report would be for resources to update current data as well as what other methods for new data. The data is key because what DBED's involved in, we are working alongside with the Department of Education and with Agribusiness Development Corporation to help understand what the doubling of food production means. So for Act 151, Act 175, and 176, all of that, we need to understand what's being imported. And then from there, we did bring on a commodity coordinator. They're tasked with reconciling, okay, do we currently grow that here? And can we scale it up? Of course, at the end of the day, too, the farmers have to be willing to scale it up. Then if they are not able to, that's a policy call. We'll continue to import the difference if nobody steps up to that. If we cannot create farmers to grow that for us. The second part then is using that template at the DOE to figure out how to increase their purchasing. We can now apply it to the general public. There'll be similarities there along that pathway. So I think one of the key things is understanding what the resources are to upgrade and update our data. So if anybody has any information on that, please send it so we can put that in as part of the report for the request. The other part is, of course, we talked about the palate changing in the diet, and that would be a huge lift on examples of the Department of Education with our youth and helping them to change their diet and their palates. One other thing that was mentioned was resiliency, time and time again, right? So when there are natural disasters, it really exposes our ecosystems and where those vulnerabilities are. And during disasters, it's always about provisional aid, getting food out, getting meals ready to eat. The challenge is we don't have those infrastructures in place yet, but we have started to. And if you think about going back to leveraging our sister agencies, and I've said this time and time again lately, through economic development and solving the challenges of our agricultural industry, as well as going after these mandates, we're starting to solve resiliency. It's the facilities and equipment that the state can help put into place, as well as the counties. If the counties have the funding as well as the areas that do it, to put in facilities that can create meals that we can extend the shelf life, put it in cold storage, and then get those out to the communities. And therefore, we don't need to rely on MREs or the DoD. So there is precedence here. We have examples, and now we just have to expand it. There are the one-offs on the, I made a note here, not one-offs capacity, correct. So, Alice, you mentioned some of the things that are being done at the county level or through the nonprofit or the small farmer levels. If there's a way that we can capture the successes of some of those one-offs, maybe how do we replicate that to build capacity? So there are good examples I've heard with some of the hotel industry on how they procure locally, and it's been successful. So if we can look at their template and how do we expand that throughout the state? I think Maui too probably has, from what CTAR tells us, they are the furthest along on with the DOE purchasing local. So we have to study what that system is, and part of it is aggregate. So aggregate facilities for food hubs or the small farmers. So the small farmers have a direct market to sell with a direct client on the end, such as the Department of Education or our state jail systems or our state hospitals. And then all of this too, there's talk about federal grants, but at some point you have to adhere and follow their guidance. If the state can just figure out a way to fund these, maybe if it's one-time expenditures, or there's a way we can subsidize, but it shows that it'll scale down on the subsidy, we can really make a justification for using the barrel tax funds, redirecting some of those funds that are being deposited into the general fund to pay for this infrastructure, pay for the programs. And what's the barrel tax's true name is food security. So we just have to build a case on here's the plan. In order to accomplish this, here are the resources that are needed. If we don't get these resources, what alternative methods can we get from the state, or the plan pauses? There's some things there, but I think data, if DOA was looking at doing something, well, we can work together and how we can support that. Because we do have some gaps in the data right now for the commodity side. Hunter.
Yeah, I guess I wonder, I was asking Weston if he could text his questions in. I guess that the chat wasn't working, but he had shared, he was asking about like if this opens up any opportunities for some data sharing up for me to be able to provide support or to enable some external support to address some of those gaps you just mentioned. I know in the past, trying to get some information from DOA or DOE and offering some support is something that I'll say Super Systems myself are still very much interested to do. What that exactly looks like, I think, is TBD, and Amanda and I are working to explore some of that together. But to your point on the barrel tax, I drafted something last year that, while I laid out that whole thing of the supply side, demand side, and need, visitor industry gets some of that supply now, and we can reorient it. But what that really relies upon is there being cash to support food banks to purchase those goods in the case of a disruption. So what was drafted last year was what I was terming a resilient relief fund that would have taken some of that barrel tax money and ideally creating a pot that's specifically earmarked for local purchasing during disruptions that can be rapidly deployed, but that gets capped, and that everything after that cap can go into all of the manner of infrastructure and the myriad other things that you just listed that I think we all know are critical, but trying to tie the two together so that we have this immediate acute resilience, building cache of cash, and then use the surplus and maybe even the interest to consistently be able to invest in the longer term resilience building strategies.
Hunter, please factor in the fact that please factor in your data collection that the barrel tax is going down because of less dependency on carbon-based fuels. Yeah, so if you rely on that, if you build yourself on that, that resource is going down, 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 down. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a very, very good point, because as you have mandates that are driving us to wean off on some of these current revenue streams. So as we work towards the goal of our RPS of weaning off of fossil fuel, that barrel tax is going to phase out. So then kind of goes back to the question about the need for exports, because that is one way. It's not going to be the only way to fill that gap, but one way to help offset some of that loss.
And Hunter, co-chair, to your point about building up state resources, I'm going to use the example of what a soul crusher was when the feds canceled the Climate Smart grant. That was the end of so many. Look, everybody's nodding their head. I mean, that project, the Climate Smart that the University of Hawaii got, I think it was 60 million. Does anybody remember? And they just pulled all the projects. That we cannot rely on the uncertainty of the federal government if they can just pull things like that. It was just an absolute soul crushing move. So yeah, let's build up our state resources so we can be reliable, with the direction that we're going.
Going to do a last call for any questions or comments for any of our presenters before I move on to item 4 on the agenda within the last 25 minutes. Great, thank you. Okay, so the last remaining items, review accomplishments and activities to date. So as Amanda walked through, she talked about the prior working group. But I'd also like to share, and this kind of comes off of why I'm pulling it up, on some of the stuff that Hunter has talked about and how DBED is in alignment or working on part of those challenges. So the overall, like what we see with this overall group, this group is helping us solve mandates that fall into agriculture. Again, doubling food production 151, the farm to school purchasing 175, and then the state institutional 176. It's all about capacity. How do we create scale to hit that capacity? And that comes down to land use, as Hunter mentioned earlier. But what's also in DBED's wheelhouse is Hawaii State Energy Office, and they're driven by a mandate, Act 97, 100% by 2045. What's also in DBED's wheelhouse is HHFDC and HCDA, both with housing development. And they're driven by another act from 2017, which was Act 127. They did a study and a report that says X amount of units delivered by 2026. They're not necessarily working in silos, but the conversations that happen may be in silos, but no one's looking at the layering of the land use strategy. So for us, it does start with agriculture, because if you look at what I have up here, this is just a map of Oahu, and that's where our population is. That's where the least amount of land is. So if we can figure this out for Oahu, then the template will be much more easier across the state. But just on this proposed map of how we're going to reach 100% RPS for Oahu, HSCO laid out projects across the island, and most of it is solar PV or solar PV storage, some wind where wind blows, and then some biofuels. Can these potential projects coexist with agriculture? So we have to understand what lands need to be set aside based off of the data to either scale up what we import, or what we do import, can it be grown here and where? So first and foremost, as Hunter mentioned, CTAR started doing some crop commodity maps. And here's an example, like sweet potato, and they worked with CTAR and DOA. So thank you to Chair Hurd and her team, and Hunter, and then Dean Parwinder. If we can start to understand everything that we import or everything that we need to scale up based off of human consumption, that'll help expand the land portfolio. So from here, once we've identified what lands are productive, whether it's for commodities as well as livestock, we're going to have to do proteins, beef, chicken, pork. The state either owns the land already, or the state has to make that acquisition. So ADC is an entity under DBED that can purchase private parcels as well as private facilities and put it into the state inventory. But once we start to understand what commodities or livestock can go where, then we can overlay the GIS of the potential energy projects, as most of them may land on agricultural land. So you'll see, not biofuel, but some of the PV solar, the land use classification could be agricultural. And did we recognize that if it's needed for ag production yet? If it is, then there has to be a policy call that the energy project may not be able to be put on those lands because we needed it for food security. Then there's the housing. So with housing, it's just plotted of all the projects across the county. Some of it may be proposed on ag land use, which then would need a district boundary amendment. But did we already say we needed that land for either commodity production or livestock. The other point to this is that as we have to develop more homes, but then they'll know that they're next to either a farm or a ranch. We do hear from the farmers about the NIMBYism. I don't like the smell, I don't like the dust. But in a land use perspective, putting that out there ahead of time, you know what you're going to be potentially living next to. So this comes back to why that data is key. What are we importing? What are we truly going to scale up? What would continue to import? And lastly, what Hunter mentioned too, when it comes to that 90% of what we import, it's not necessarily, I think, as of right now, economically in our interest to bring that down to zero. At some point, the low-hanging fruit, if we just say, look, we already grow that, we just got to scale it up, that may take us down hypothetically to 60%. Then we look at what the remaining 60% is. And if that's something that, if maybe 30% is what we can grow or produce here, then the remaining 30% is a policy call again of continue to import that. Why? Because maybe it's not scalable here, or two, it's helping to subsidize other costs of other commodities and goods being shipped in. So that's part of DBED's responsibility too, is to balance that out as we have this conversation. So for the accomplishments to date, we are chasing as part of this overall plan, the Act 151, 175, and 176. Moving forward, just to make the deadline for this year's report, as I mentioned, the bill doesn't tell us when this dissolves, so it's ongoing. And it looks like as of right now, we'll have to do a report every year. So there will be probably convenings of this working group as we go forward into 2026. I think at that time too, based off of Amanda's presentation, there will need to be establishment of probably subcommittees. So then if we do look at, okay, potential membership, who are those and what does that look like? The next, what I'm suggesting is probably at least 2 meetings in December. And at the next meeting, if the co-chair heard and our members Chun and for the COIT, oh, sorry, Lighty, I'll come right back to you, sorry. I'm going to take the discussion today from the presentation as well as the discussion with all those who are in attendance and put together just an initial draft of report. And that way we can have something to review at the next meeting, and then we can add to it and revise that. The goal would be the 4th meeting, which is the 2nd meeting in December thereafter, to do final revisions and then the board vote on that report that we can submit. So that's just for conversational. I'll go to Lighty real quick and then we can do closing comments.
Hello, Dane and everyone. I do want to let the group know I have a new role with Hawaii Department of Education, Hawaii Child Nutrition Programs Office. I'm the farm to school program specialist. So I look forward to just joining the conversations around farm to school at this level. And I really appreciate you bringing in the overlap between agriculture, energy, and housing, and not only the coexistence between agriculture and energy, but housing and agriculture as well, because of the link between food security and land access, right? I don't think we should continue with kind of the mindset of housing or farming, right? Just to put that out there, that we can start to rethink maybe how we integrate housing with agriculture. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments, questions, ideas to move forward? Okay. Thank you all. Thank you to our presenters today. So I don't have a date. I gotta have our staff at ADC and DBED secure the dates in December. But we do have, for those people who submitted their names before to be added onto the list, we did send out that calendar. If you're not and you're unsure, just send in an email to the dbed.adc@hawaii.gov that you want to be added onto the working group list. So when we set that date, we'll send out the agenda as well as the virtual meeting link. Great. No other questions or comments? Everybody, thank you for your time this morning and enjoy the rest of the day and have a nice weekend. Bye.
Happy Thanksgiving, everybody.
Thank you.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah.